Okay, well, good morning. It's 9:02. I'd like to call the Thursday, March 27th, 2025 meeting of the Tucson-Pima County Joint Consolidated Code Committee to order. Can we have the roll call, please?
Rick Wright,
Here.
Dennis Kuhn,
Here.
Fred Knapp,
Here.
Jeff Hamstra,
Here.
Ken Cawthorn,
Here.
Thomas Hayes,
Here.
Dave Gibbons.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes from February 11th. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes? So moved. Second?
Second. Jeff
Any-
Hamstra.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion passes. Okay, the next item is acknowledgement of constituent comments. So I kind of pass it to you, Clayton, if you want to summarize.
Certainly.
So we have some guests here that want to speak.
Certainly. And just want to remind everyone to please state your name when speaking for the record. This is Clayton with the City of Tucson. We've received several requests that the section that changed in the NEC for kitchen island and peninsula receptacles would be revised or amended back to the previous language in the current 2018 code. We've heard this from several different folks as you've been notified. And also, one step further, we've been tracking the City of Phoenix subcommittee process, and they have also reverted back to the previous language. So we wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. We have already covered the IRC. However, as this is being brought to our attention, we see that other municipalities are modifying this section. We wanted to bring it to your attention. In the meeting materials, I'm not sure if we posted meeting materials, but I sent a spreadsheet out of comments from staff comments. In those comments, we did provide some proposed language should you choose to also amend this section for the island receptacles. That's up for your discussion.
Okay. Why don't we take that one on first? Anybody have any comments on the island receptacles?
Sure, I'll jump in on that. It's Dennis. What I've learned about the change in the NEC was that there was significant data of people being injured because of receptacles located below the countertops and a cord that's plugged in there, then looping around the counter to a hot appliance above the countertop. And typically small children would grab the cords and pull the hot appliance down and, get burns or hurt some way. And that's the concern. The change to the NEC prohibited the below counter installation of receptacles on island and peninsula countertops, but it did not require the installation of an above counter receptacle. However, it does not prohibit the installation of an above counter receptacle. So should a person wanting to build said counter want that above counter receptacle, they're not prohibited from putting it in. The other thing that the National Electrical Code does is it requires the installation of a branch circuit for that above counter receptacle that could be terminated in the base cabinet space, so that if a subsequent occupant or owner of the building wanted to install the receptacle, the wiring would be close by and relatively easy. Now there's the concern about the above counter receptacles is that there is a prohibition of taking a standard receptacle, which would normally say be in a wall, and just mounting it flush in the countertop face up. That's prohibited by code. So there would need to be some other style of receptacle, and that could include a pedestal style receptacle. Most people don't like those for aesthetic reasons, but it would be approved. If there was an upper cabinet above the countertop, you could actually mount the receptacle in the upper cabinet or under the upper cabinet. You can always provide a pendant cord drop receptacle above the countertop. And you could install a pop-up style outlet that's in the countertop. Those are now commercially available so that they can be retracted down flush and then pop up. Of course, all those things cost more money than sticking a standard receptacle in the base cabinet below the countertop. But you know, I don't know what the people's concerns are of eliminating the requirement for the below counter receptacle. I personally think that NEC didn't go far enough. They should have, they prohibited a receptacle below the countertop to serve. But there's another section in the code that talks about island and peninsula being room dividers. And that has a requirement for a receptacle, and that actually didn't get deleted. So we could be in a situation now where people would be installing receptacles on the sides of the island if they think they're functioning as a room divider, but it wouldn't be serving the purpose of the above counter. I mean, it's just not fully worked out. But that's the issues as I see it. I am reluctant, given all of what's known about the people being injured by cords coming off the countertops. I'm reluctant to go back to the 2018. And if we think that it's a safety hazard to not have a receptacle, then we should require that a receptacle be installed above the countertop. I'm not in favor of doing that because I think that people should have the option of building the way they want to build it. But if the true concern about going back to 2018 is not having that receptacle, that would be the way to resolve it and not to go back to 2018.
Mr. Chair, if I may, this is Clayton. I will also say that the city of Phoenix did propose, the staff proposal was to mandate that the receptacle is provided in the island to address the concern of potentially having extension cords that extend from other parts of the room towards the island, and then you have this extension cord draped across spaces. So I just want to also give some context that part of their discussion included mandating that receptacle in the island and peninsulas to avoid the potential for extension cords.
Quite the contrary. Well, I mean, our general philosophy here is we will accept the national code unless there's a local condition that would require that to be changed. That's kind of, we don't follow that 100%, but that's kind of the general direction we're heading. I don't know what the local condition would be. Warren, going back to, somebody has a thought on that.
I will say that, this is Clayton again, I will say that the information that was presented to the National Fire Protection Association, the NFPA, that wrote the NEC change, the information was provided from the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and the injuries that they were reporting amounted to approximately 300 per year of severe burns that were occurred from appliances being pulled off of the counters.
Which is the reason I oppose any deviation from getting rid of that receptacle under the counter. And I think it doesn't go far enough. It should prohibit any receptacle below the counter.
This is Dan. There are people that have felt that even if you had a pop-up receptacle, the cord is still there that you can grab and pull it over. I'm just saying that's comments I have.
This is Dennis again. Let me comment on that. Years ago, the electrical code required outlets spaced no more than 12 feet apart and no more than 6 feet from the ends above countertops. And I'm not sure exactly when it changed, maybe 20 years ago, perhaps a little further back. They changed the spacing requirements above countertops to be no more than 2 feet from the side and then 4 feet on center. And concurrent with that, standards for appliances that would normally be used in kitchens started coming with very short cords on them. And that was specifically done for that very reason, that prior to that, most coffee makers, frying pans, whatever, they had 6-foot long cord. And you could plug into an above counter receptacle, that cord could hang over the edge. And so all of that happened at that time to address the issue of that. Now, I mean, it's been a long time since you can buy appliance with that long cord. Now, granted, placement of the receptacle, if somebody put a pop-up receptacle right at the edge of the countertop, I suppose a cord could still drop down from that and then go to an appliance. I don't know if we could solve every condition, but we've got data that kids are getting, just heard severely burned. 300? You know, I don't feel we should back down from trying to address that problem. And I think that's why the NEC tried to address the problem. Of course, what's in the NEC should be paralleled to the IRC.
This is, Dan, one more time. Another thought is that you could do the islands that had the bar top. You had lower and then an upper, and then you'd have that wall, you could put a receptacle.
Yeah, and I think if you actually have that, then that would be what most people would do, like to do.
Right.
And I'm not sure if that's actually required to put it in if you have that condition. It may be. I didn't bring the code.
No, I don't, well, I'd have to double check, but my understanding is you're not required to put a receptacle.
I thought it was more prohibiting the below counter,
is.
and then, yeah, it doesn't require the one above receptacle, just the
Right.
circuit.
Yeah. But that would be one option that you could.
But we don't want to require people to put a step-up countertop in
No, I'm
either.
just
That would
saying-
be impacting people's design.
I'm just
decisions.
saying that is an option if somebody really wanted a receptacle. It's not the current practice, because normally they're just a flat island anymore. Instead of ones with the bar. But I think what I'm trying to say, Dennis, is there are multiple options if you want to do it and you don't want to do the pop-up receptacle.
I agree.
So any further discussion? Go ahead, you're home builder. You can-
Well,
you can-
this is Tom Hayes. My thought on that is, if they keep the receptacles at the end of the islands and there's usually just a 1-inch overhang on the countertop. So that is a convenient way of doing it. Whether it's safe or not, we could argue. There's also the argument that, are the pop-up receptacles safe? Could that be causing injuries to people in the future? So I'm for sticking with the 2018 code.
You have thoughts? Okay. Shall we vote on this?
We would need a motion.
Right.
Need a motion.
You would need a motion, especially since you've already voted to approve the IRC without this provision. You would be bringing a new one back in, so it would require a vote to take an action, which would also require a motion.
Dennis, you wanna?
Nope.
No, you don't wanna make the motion?
Nope.
What are you gonna do?
The motion would be to change, and I'm not in favor of the change.
Okay,
But I don't know, there's other people in the committee. And other
someone
voters.
has to make a motion to change it. Or to move forward,
To change the 24.
to go back to the
go back to
18 for
18.
these.
I'll make the motion to change.
You'll
that.
make the motion. Now, here's the
And the
question.
intent would be to both NEC and IRC to bring them in sync.
And this is just one clarification there. By changing the NEC, you are effectively changing the IRC because the IRC's electrical section is based off of the NEC.
And administratively, you wouldn't have problem with them being,
We,
the written being different, or you just go ahead and you?
we would
you
take
make
that
the
as
change?
changing both.
Yeah, I just want to make sure. That's
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second? Having no second, the motion dies. Okay. So we can move on to item 3B.
Mr. Chair, this is Clayton. I would like to give a brief summary of the NEHB proposals that we've received, excluding the energy provisions, since we'll address the energy provisions under the IECC agenda item. Staff reviewed all of the proposals that NHB pushed forward, and we did not agree or recommend that any of these provisions would be recommended for the city of Tucson. We have a number of provisions that were pushed forward from the NHB that don't apply to our region. Windborne debris, for example, near coastal regions. There's also proposals for fire separation distance, which we already amend locally. The proposal was to change from 5 feet to 3 feet. We already do that here. There's another proposal for exempting sprinklers in single family residences. We already do that here. So several of the provisions are addressed locally, and we've already discussed those, and staff feel like we've already addressed the provisions that the NAHB would apply to our region. Other proposals such as reducing the tread depth on stairs, removing the GFCI requirements and so forth, we do not recommend.
Garage door separate or self-closing garage door.
And there's a number of GFCI items on there. There's one for the GFCI on garage door openers, suggesting that the ceiling receptacle that controls the garage door opener should not be GFCI protected because you can't reach the button. But it would be a poor decision to place a reset button on the ceiling.
That's prohibited already because in the GFCI provisions in the code, it says that the reset has to be readily accessible. And readily accessible means you don't have to use a ladder to get to it. So what would have to be done on that outlet on a ceiling is it's fed through a wall mounted GFCI device, or the circuit breaker. If you want that on an individual circuit, use a circuit breaker type GFCI. All of those products are readily available and likely would not be a overkill on construction cost.
Couldn't agree more. So, but with that, I know we have a guest in the room that may want to speak on these items.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Ben Garcia on behalf of the Southern Arizona Home Builders Association and the Arizona Multi Housing Association. I'm not a builder. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an architect. I'm a community and economic development planner. Hell, I had to take statistics 3 times in college just to pass the C. Certainly, Saba and AMA are not opposed to building codes. We just ask you to keep in mind the context under which you're operating. There's no debate about the fact that we're in a huge housing affordability crisis in our community. And right now in our industry, we're suffering a death of 1,000 cuts. I alluded to a recently passed city ordinance that would add $500,000 to the cost of constructing your average 200-unit apartment complex. Both the city and the county are considering impact fee increases in the range of 40 to 45%. The outdoor lighting code is proposing requiring now that all outdoor lighting be motion sensor, which obviously is a little bit more expensive. So just want to bring that in, that context to your discussions here today. Again, we're not opposed to this. We're just hoping that you will consider our proposals from a standpoint of keeping the regulations at a point where they do match the builder and the homeowner's preferences, the end user's preferences. So I do appreciate you really listening, though I was late to the party, and I'll maybe have a few more things to share about the next item if you wish. But again, I'm not an expert. I'm just here I want to share with you the context in which we're operating. And every time we add costs, it just makes it harder and harder for us to deliver that housing, affordable housing that our community so desperately needs. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? No? No, I appreciate that. You know, each thing seems insignificant in the scheme of things, but when you have 100 of those, then it gets an expense. But, you know, it's safety versus expense, so it's always a tough call to make.
Mr. Chairman, this is Dennis. Maybe I will make a comment. My personal belief is that the code making process at the national level is flawed. These are supposedly consensus codes, whether it's done by the ICC or the NFPA. But everybody, anybody can put in a proposal to alter the code. And an awful lot of people do. It's just all over the place. And there is a lot of pushback to things, but there's also a lot of lobbying that goes on from manufacturers. They build a new widget, so get it in the code, get it required. I think to some extent that may be happening, particularly at the NFPA, and with all the GFCI requirements now expanding to heavy duty outlets, to outdoor, even hardwired air conditioners and things like that. What I've noticed in the electrical code is the goal to it's the camel gets its nose under the tent and the first time it goes in, and then they just keep building and building and building and building. And anytime they come out with something new, they put it in the code and they require it. I think it's out of control, but the problem is we're operating under guise that we want to be on current nationally recognized codes. So, you know, how far can we go in Tucson? We don't want to be the outlier of where the country's going in general on these codes. So, you know, I have a personal dilemma on so much of these things, but I'm held back on a lot of it with the underlying idea that we're supposed to do what the you know, make amendments when they particularly suit our Tucson and Pima County area, and maybe we can look broader on that, because if we have unique economic conditions differing from the rest of the country, or availability of qualified people to build things, et cetera, maybe that's enough of a reason. I'm not sure, but you know, that's the dilemma I think we all have.
And then there are some financial consequences for not staying current with national codes.
But how do we build economic affordable and make affordable housing?
Tough call.
I'm stuck.
Any other comments? Anyone care to make a motion to accept any of these recommended changes? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on to item 3C, roof ventilation.
Mr. Chair, this is Clayton. Again, this was a late recommendation to the process to consider unvented attic assemblies and the potential hardships associated with flammable refrigerants, and for the potential danger of having flammable refrigerants in buildings. Based on the roof ventilation proposals, we as staff did not find any recommendations that suit our local needs. If you recall, a number of years ago, there used to be pre-approved designs for unvented attics for our specific region that were available through Pima County and City of Tucson that we've distributed as a result of local engineers producing designs for unvented attic assemblies. There are also a number of building science experts that recommend keeping ducts in conditioned space for efficiency and a number of other reasons. And so for those reasons, we do not recommend changing the provisions for unvented attics. This has been reviewed by a vast number of experts, and the current provisions in the IRC address those design accommodations for the way houses are currently being built in the Southwest Arizona. As it relates to the flammable refrigerants, we've talked at extent about the A2L refrigerants in this committee. And we've also considered how at the national level, ASHRAE is continuously improving and updating information. And I'll just remind the committee that you recommended that we meet on a quarterly basis after our amendment package is complete to continue reviewing updates from ASHRAE and so forth. And one final point on the flammable refrigerant discussion, would also like to remind the committee that regionally, we developed a policy that allows the use of ASHRAE standards in lieu of the refrigerant chapters in both the IRC and IMC. And that's been approved by all of the jurisdictions in Southern Arizona. This was a unified movement that we made on behalf of this committee to accept those alternate provisions of ASHRAE, noting that these flammable refrigerants are being mandated at the federal level and is really out of our control locally.
On the, I think it's important on the unvented attic, it's not required that you have an unvented attic. It's just one of the options, one of the strategies you can use. I personally don't care for that strategy, but that's an option that somebody can do, it's just not required.
This is Jeff. My experience with it is it really makes our job easier, the unvented attic situation, and getting those ducts brought inside the envelope and that type of thing. So I've seen it become very successful, and there's always been a mold concern. And through all of the housing and what have you that we've done, we've not experienced any of those types of issues. And that's why you vent a roof, is for moisture. And we just don't have at our elevation and our climate, we don't have those conditions that are conducive to having a normal vented attic. So I think it's a wise move on both city and county to have those provisions, and and following ASHRAE through this, I think Ken would agree, is something, is a ever moving and changing thing that kind of following the ASHRAE guidelines with the A2L is the wise.
Any other comments?
My thumbs up.
Thumbs up? Okay. We got a thumbs up. Okay, so does anyone care to make a motion on item 3C? Any more discussion on this item? Oh, good. You're good. Okay, well, if there's no further discussion, we'll move on to the next item. Item 4, 2024 International Energy Conservation Code. For acknowledgement of constituent comments. So, Clayton, you wanna, you or Dan wanna give us an overview here?
This is Clayton. I would like to speak to the provisions that the city of Phoenix and the city of Chandler have been making on their IEC 2024 IEC adoption process. But at this point, I don't have any comments on the NAHB recommendations for the energy code compliance.
Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, the residential code got published late, and comments are coming in late. Okay. Anybody else have any comments?
So this is Ken Cawthorn. So I mean, I've got some comments on the IRC and the energy section. They're somewhat related to the IECC discussions. So I don't know if we want to, but those I think we could discuss as we're going through the IECC.
Okay,
Is that all right? Or do you want to, should I bring them up now? These are IRC comments that I have based on the, reviewing it further, because now since have been reviewing the IECC, I've been also going back through and reviewing the IRC, the energy sections, which is the end sections of the IRC. And so I did have some comments on some of those.
Well, we have some constituents here that may have some comments. Maybe we should take those first
Okay,
and then move on.
sure. So most of them are, so there was the first one, I'll just go in order here.
Well, I mean, we have some guests.
Oh, okay, take their
Maybe let them
comments.
speak.
Sure. Okay,
You'll have the chance.
okay. Jumping ahead.
Okay, Angela Garcia again. I just want to again comment, I'm not an expert, but we're really seeking to mitigate the increased cost of construction in order to, help address the housing affordability. I did check with one of our custom builders, and I've been a lobbyist for so long, I've gotten very cynical. And so I asked him, I said, well, is it possible to build a home that is ultimately efficient, 100% complete, the best HERS score out there? And his answer surprised me. He said, absolutely. And there was a pause. And he said, if money was no object. So I want you to consider that a lot of this is driven, doesn't necessarily have to be prescriptive. A lot of it is being driven by the market. My understanding is that the average home built in 2018 had a HERS score of about 70. The ones that are going in the ground now are closer to the upper mid-50s, upper 60s. So a lot of that's already being addressed by the market and the demand of the consumers out there. So
If I can comment on the HERS rating, I mean, we've done some apartments that are HERS rating. And the real key to the HERS rating is the inspection during construction to make sure everything is installed as it should be. That doesn't always happen on a non-HERS rating building. Get the HERS rating, you have to have the inspections. And they're pretty thorough on everything that goes in there. To me, the inspections ensure that it gets done as designed is more important than the requirement. And that's why the HERS buildings perform so well, because of the inspections.
well, that's just, I'm done.
Just a quick comment, resident posted the information. I want to say the average HERS rating in Arizona is 54. It could be 53. I know it's lower in up in Phoenix than it is down here, but the average across the state is 54. So as you mentioned, yeah, the builders are already able to build to that level, and I think that's what's in the code today. If it's not at 52, I'd have to look.
Well, yeah, but my always concern is coming on out of the job site, saying stuff not installed properly, insulation not installed properly, ductwork's not installed properly. And if there's no follow through during construction, then all these requirements. I mean, that's what makes,
That's
that's what
whether
makes
it's a
this,
HERS rating or prescriptive. There's issues if it's not.
well, that's what makes HERS rating so successful in my mind, is it's inspected, basically commissioned, that it's built as designed.
In that third part, which you're
Right.
saying.
Right.
No, sir.
That's it. Skipped over the cost of compliance. Which is
Well,
always.
I should thank you for as I mentioned earlier, it's Ben Bueller Garcia again. I was having trouble viewing the documents that were part of the packet, but I thought I saw something in there, a comment from NHB about the cost of compliance. I just want to clarify that the numbers that I've been given relate to the cost of moving from the 2018 to the 2024 code. It's about $3,000 more per month. Not necessarily the last code. So I just want that to be on record. That's the numbers that we I think want to make sure we're in a record for the company.
I think part of the problem is mortgages. Those energy efficiencies and cost savings aren't calculated into qualifying for a mortgage. So if you're paying less for utilities, obviously. More for mortgage, but that's not calculated. So we have an added expense that's not addressed on the mortgage side.
This is Clayton with the city. I just want to point out that there are reports from NAHB that compare the 2018 IECC to the 2021 and additional reports that compare the 21 to the 24. The reports indicate that the life cycle payback for climate zone 2 is 7.6 years for the change from the 18 to the 21, and then 5.2 years for the change from the 21 to the 24. Those are the values that were published by NAHB as life cycle payback time. Based on 2,400 square foot single family residence.
Ben, do you know what the average?
I do not.
Bigger than it used to be, that's so. They're getting smaller. Well, we have some other items here. B, C, D, and E. Anybody have any comments on those? If not, I'll turn Ken loose on the energy code. Cause these look like specific sections in the
Yeah.
energy code.
Yeah, they're more related to overall energy code, right?
If our guests don't have a comment, we'll just go through and let Ken take control here.
Sure. This is Ken Cawthorn. I wanted to just start by saying the same thing that Dennis just said a little bit ago, and that is I'm extremely disappointed in the IECC of the 2024 IECC. I think it's what it's asking is it should not be mandatory. And it's going to be I think a major cost issue, more so than what it was led to believe. I mean, this is the code and commentary. I mean, it's going to take years just to understand it. It's just so enormous, and so much is written in it that it's just going to take a long time to try to figure it all out. And it is very complex. I mean, especially certain sections, you know, they've got many charts you have to go through, many options you have to choose from. And I know they were trying to make it easier by giving you many options, but it actually makes it just very complex to go through. So anyways, that's my opinion of the code itself. My fear is that if we decide to not accept it, that it will get implemented anyways. And so that has me concerned. Because that would be my first option, would be not to even accept the 2024 code, because it's just so overwhelming. But then if it gets accepted with no amendments, I think that would be a worse situation. So then it's going through and trying to figure out what sections and how to modify them, which I tried to go through. So let me just go through some of the sections that I wanted to at least address that I saw, and Dennis has got a lot of input into this too. But the first section that I think, I'll just go through these in order that they show up in, and that is section 405 2.2.4, which is daylighting responsive controls.
So that's C405.
C405, thank you. Yes, yeah.
Did you want to make some comments on the residential energy code?
I do. Should I start with the residential energy section while they're here?
Visitors are interested in the residential.
Sure. I'll do those in numerical orders first, I guess. The first one is section in the IRC 2024 IRC section N1103.7. That deals with equipment sizing and efficiency rating. So it basically comes and says newer replacement heating and cooling equipment shall have an efficiency equal to or greater than the minimum required by federal law for the geographical location where the equipment is installed. The reason they say that is we're in the DOE, the the southwest region as defined by the DOE, Arizona is. So we have to, so the efficiencies that we have to meet are different than, for instance, you can get in Utah or even Utah. So you can buy a a less efficient AC unit in Utah, but you can't buy it or install it in Arizona. So the question that was brought to our attention during the last couple of weeks here was, should we define those numbers so that the plan reviewers know what those numbers are? And my thought is yes, we could just refer back to the IECC, because the IECC has 17 charts on equipment efficiencies. And so we could just refer to those tables in the IECC. What the downside of that is that somebody then would need to either go online or purchase, or if it's free to look at it online, those tables up on the IECC. And we have local amendments to those tables where we'll have. So that would show the regional differences. So I guess if we wanted to, we could go ahead and add a statement, add a sentence to this section 1103.7 that just says, refer to IECC table C 403.3.2 tables, because there's 17 of them, and local amendment. And that would refer them to, rather than trying to repeat those 17 tables. And we don't, for residential, we wouldn't need to repeat all 17, but realize you've got rooftop package, you've got splits, you've got air conditioning with gas heat, you've got heat pumps, you got air conditioning with electric heat, you've got splits, you got mini splits and different types, you've got VRF systems that are used in residential, you've got small chillers that are used. So there's a lot of those tables that are in the IECC that are not in, they're nowhere to be found in the IRC. So that's why I guess I just refer to all the tables and let them pick their equipment. So if that's okay, that was the first sentence I was thinking of adding. And that's more to help to direct people as far as where to go to find the efficiencies of what's the minimum required. Because if you look it up, if you go online and just look up a air conditioning unit, you're going to find lower efficiencies than what's required in our region. So then you'd have to try to figure out what is our region required, which isn't easy, by the way. It took a few days to remember where to find that and how to get it. Even for the manufacturers, it's difficult. So anyways.
So is there any issue with the change that Ken's proposing?
This is Clayton. No, we support this. I would just like to add to Ken's comments that if it's difficult for the building officials and the mechanical engineers that serve on this committee to find that information, think about how difficult it is for the average homeowner and or new plan reviewers that are coming in. And so, this change, okay, would support making sure that everyone is on the same page, and we encourage that. The one caveat that I would like to put forward is that we need a reference from the Department of Energy, okay, or a other federal site that gives us that clear direction on what the efficiency is. As noted, it's not necessarily very easy to find or locate online. And there is a lot of other information that is also available online that can mislead people. So I just want to make sure that we're pointing to the right source to find the correct values. Okay.
Jim Myers here, and so adding to that, I remember I was on this committee and having the discussion that I wasn't too confident about this addition because, the way it's set up, the DOE sets the criteria. You're gonna be at this efficiency level, and you cannot produce more, or you cannot import after a certain date. But you can still sell, if you find some old ones on the shelf, you can
Right.
still sell and install them. So that's out there, that's applicable today, it's always been applicable, and so this kind of conflicts with that. So I have seen a municipality, not in the 24, but in the earlier code, I want to say it was the 2018, where they included that information in their policy, the building department policy. These are the approved or minimum efficiency equipment in our locale. So
Yeah, and this is Ken Cawthorn. And my thought is, you know, we already have the tables in the IECC. And we need to amend the one table for the, there's one piece we need to amend. And that's why I guess my thought is, so it's already available there to find. And once we do that amendment, then everybody knows where to go to find these efficiencies. And we're not left. And it is, like I said, it is challenging because that equipment is still available. Some manufacturers reps don't understand it's not. Because realize the rep may be the same company that's in Utah, in Arizona. So they think it's always been available, and yet it's not. And so that's why I think it needs to be shown.
Available or allowed to be used.
It's not allowed to be sold or installed.
it can
So,
be sold, Jim Myers, it can be sold as long as it was already produced. It just can't be newly produced or imported.
well,
It can't be
this is-
installed.
no,
Dennis,
that's different. It's different because you could still sell the less efficient equipment and install it
Yes.
in Utah and other regions. But they can't purchase or install in Arizona. Now, there was a time delay on that of 1 year. This was my understanding, and which is already passed at this point. Because that was 2023 that went into effect. So that DOE change. So they can't even install them now.
Well, so, but it's theoretically possible that it could get installed in error.
Yes, right,
Legally, they can't, but. it's
Right,
possible.
right. and that's why I think several code officials were asking, what are the minimums and how do we check this? Yeah,
It sounds like it's a different problem than, say, transitioning to the refrigerant. Because there it was depletion of old stock equipment.
right.
But here, the substandard equipment for us meets the standard for somebody else. And the problem is if say a contractor here can get a deal to get a dozen units from some other place.
Correct.
If they don't understand how it is, what it's supposed to be, they might inadvertently buy that deal and have the wrong equipment. And that's the reason I think you can't say, well, just because it's been manufactured, you can put it in. If it's important enough to have the standard here, then I guess you gotta implement the standard.
Right, and that's why I think we need to define that, which is one of the amendments I was proposing for the IECC. But rather than going through and defining all that in the IRC, I think just reference it.
Yeah, that'd be.
So that's what we would do, is just reference, 2024 IECC table C 403.3.2. Which there's 17 tables in that section, because there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, so anyways.
Well, question, Clayton, do we want to take these amendments one by one? Would that be easier, or do it all at the end?
I would definitely suggest taking them one by one.
Okay.
As far as any motions that you want to take on them. Just because, the committee may feel differently on some items other than, others.
Okay. All right,
So I make a motion to add that sentence to section N 1103.7.
We have a second?
I'll second that.
Any comments?
I'd like to make a comment. Brad Townsend.
Okay.
Used to be an HVAC contractor, many years ago. But all of your manufacturers and all of your distributors know what those minimum efficiencies, particularly for air conditioning, are for this region. Now, that doesn't prevent somebody from, LTLing a few units from another market. But the norm and, from the home builder standpoint, they're all on the same page and can't get that lesser efficiency equipment that might get installed in Minnesota or Utah. But, that's been my experience. And even from the building envelope side, because of the above code programs and the utility companies, Southwest Gas and TEP supporting the above code programs, most of them are building beyond the 21 code already today. And it's pretty revealing.
I mean, that's a good point. My concern is the homeowner doing his own house,
Sure.
who isn't privy to all this. That might buy a unit in error.
That would be the city's concern as well. We've seen a number of situations where equipment is shipped from other countries or neighboring country primarily, okay? And these aren't situations on the production builders, right? These are situations on, minor additions where somebody's trying to do the work themselves and they found a deal, right? And so we're basically making sure that everybody is aware and playing on the same field.
Yeah, Amazon doesn't check. Any other comments?
Jim Myers here. Yeah, just a quick comment. I'm on the ICC website and they have it produced. They have a nice map. And so maybe that's what we're using in I codes. Maybe that's what we should use as a reference versus DOE. I don't know. It's just,
Yeah.
It's right here on the ICC website.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this can get pretty complex for the non.
Yeah, it is very
Non-professional,
complex. It already
So
is.
I'm assuming staff can come up with some handout that simplifies it for the homeowner that's.
Certainly, and, referencing the energy code is the right approach.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll call the question. All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed, the motion passes.
Okay, this is Ken Cawthorn. The other two items that I had with the IRC energy portion were somewhat, were pointed out to me as I was going through this energy section. The IECC were pointed out to me too through listening to what Phoenix was going through too. But these sections were N 1104.2, which is interior lighting controls, and N 1104.3, which is exterior lighting controls. So in Phoenix, they deleted both those sections for safety concerns, is what they were saying. So they were, those sections are, you need basically occupancy sensors in
And dimmers,
right, in residential, in your house.
So in interior spaces, you'd have to have some occupancy sensors, you'd have to have dimmers. And on the exterior, you'd have to have automatic controls that are trying to keep turning lights off.
Right.
So if you wanted to leave a light on, it would be tough to do so.
So both those sections in Phoenix were deleted for safety concerns. And I just wanted to point that out, that, and I was gonna just go ahead and recommend the same thing, because I know they're trying to get people to turn things off, but sometimes people are turning them on because they want them on, because they need to have them on. And so that had me concerned about those two sections.
Yeah, this is Brett, to your point.
They do it for security a lot of times overnight, so like lights around the house.
So my motion would be to delete sections N 1104.2 and N 1104.3 in the 2024 IRC.
Okay, do we have a second?
Real quick, just for clarification, in the IRC, it's probably gonna be referenced as R 404.2 and R.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Not voting Jim Myers here. How does this, as I read this, and I've also been participating in the
Yeah,
meetings,
exactly.
and saw what they did, yeah, I agree. How does this comply, how does it conflict, if any, with the dark sky requirements you have in the city?
This
The
is,
exterior light.
yeah, this is Clayton. We're actually meeting again next week with the Tucson-Pima County Outdoor Lighting Code Committee. And a number of provisions have been discussed at this point as far as timers and curfews associated with timers and or motion controls. None of those provisions have been voted on at the committee level yet. But we will be moving forward with those. From the city of Tucson's perspective, we would, or at least from my perspective, I can understand and relate to the safety concerns associated with the interior lighting controls, but the exterior lighting controls, primarily because of our outdoor lighting code progression, we would encourage you to keep the exterior lighting controls, which require daylight sensors to turn off the lights, right?
Well, I've got an interesting situation at my house. They didn't put street lights in, but somebody put a light over the street address on the house. With the lights off, you can't read the street address. So then that's another safety issue. So would that one have to be on a sensor?
Well, so I want to point out that what I would encourage you to consider is that the interior controls that are based on motion sensing or occupant identification are one consideration, and the exterior controls that turn the lights off during the day when the sun's out is a different concern. There's no safety concern for turning a light off outside when the sun's shining.
This is Dennis. I'd like to make a couple of comments, and I can say that I'm also the vice chair of the Tucson-Pima County Outdoor Lighting Code Committee. I'm also active on the subcommittee that is involved in the rewrite of the code, or the update of the code. And presently in the outdoor lighting code, I don't think we have anything about controls for residential. It's all commercial. There's a number of control requirements, but it leaves residential alone. That's something that I think we'll still have some discussion on. With regard to what's in the IECC and therefore the IRC, it goes, way beyond what our lighting code is doing, and it goes beyond turning them off in the daylight because there's multiple things that you have to do. You have to have a switch that can do manual on and permits automatic off. You have to be automatically shut off when daylight is present. And then you have to be able to override. So it's adding parts and pieces, at least a photocell, possibly a time controller that would have to go into every residential project. That adds construction costs.
Well, I guess the question is, if we change the outdoor lighting requirements here, are we gonna get a conflict with the outdoor lighting code?
I think on that basis, the most stringent requirements would apply.
Agreed. So, and this is Clayton. What I'm hearing is a proposal to remove this section out of the IRC. So if there was any provisions that were adding them to the outdoor lighting code, it wouldn't affect this provision to remove it here.
or if this is more stringent than the outdoor lighting code, then the energy codes would still have to be complied with, even if the outdoor lighting code didn't address it.
Correct.
So we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
This is Dennis, I'll second it.
Okay. Any more discussion? So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay. This is Ken Cawthorn again. Those were my IRC comments. The rest of the comments I have are related to the IECC. So I'll start with our table, the mechanical table C 403.3.2 parentheses 1, which it defines air conditioners that are less than 5 ton, less than 65,000 MBH, so 5 tons and less. Basically, the code just requires them to be a minimum 13.4 SEER 2, I'm sorry, 13.4 SEER 2. Whereas our region, for if they're 45 MBH or if they're less than 45 MBH, so in other words, 3.5 tons or smaller, it's required for split systems to be a minimum 14.3 SEER 2. And then for split systems, air conditioners that are between 45 and 65 MBH, which is between, so it would be 3.5 ton, or which would be 4 and 5 ton units, requires them to be 13.8 SEER 2. And then for or less than, for between, and then the rest is pretty much for rooftop packaged equipment and for single for 3-phase equipment. It would be similar to what's required by the code, which is just 13.4 SEER 2. So I guess I wanted to rewrite that first section in that table to address the regional DOE requirement. So in other words, less than 45 MBH, the minimum is 14.3 SEER 2. Between 45 and 65 MBH, the minimum is for split system. This is just for split system single phase units. It's 13.8 SEER 2. And then for split system 3-phase and for single package units, it's the 13.4 SEER 2. So that's how that the opening part of that. So we would have to strike out that first part of that table, which I don't know how to write that into Word. I'm not a very good Word person, in Word. So I was challenged enough just to make tables, but to make the old table and strike it out was even harder. So I'll let somebody else try to do that. So it's just striking out that first portion of the table and rewriting it with this requirement. Okay.
Okay, so does that mean a new table?
No,
No.
I think what Ken's saying is we keep the table, but we delete. That's part I'm a little confused on these.
Yeah.
These first 3.
No, just that first part, that air conditioners, air cooled, less than 65 BTU per hour.
Okay, so just that first column.
Yeah,
And replace it with what you.
correct.
Which would be a new column to this table.
Correct.
Yes,
Okay.
What way I'd probably write it is I would say remove. I'm not sure how I would word it exactly, but remove that and replace with.
ideally, yeah, you'd reproduce that table and just scratch out that
Right.
first
That's what I
part.
would do.
Yeah. I'm just not good at tables and stuff. Like I said, Word isn't my Excel.
This is Clayton. I would just recommend the amendment delete the first row of the table.
Yes, that's what we meant.
And that's that row of the table, okay, can then be replaced with new information. As far as an amendment writing, that's fairly easy to produce in written form if we just say remove and replace that first row.
Okay, and it's just the one table. All the rest, the heat pumps, all the rest are per national standard, so there's no regional differences there.
But the first row, this corrects it to our regional
And
requirements.
yes, it corrects it for our regional.
And if we don't do this, someone might read the code and say, oh, I bought a 13.4
Correct.
and I can use it, when in reality they can't.
Or some plan official might review it and say 13.4 meets code. And somebody installing it, yeah, 13.4, I got the code book in front of me, it meets code.
And then after the fact,
So the motion will be first row.
And replace it,
with the DOE requirement.
correct.
That's your motion.
It does, so the motion is to delete the first row of table C, 403.3.2, parentheses 1. And replace it with the DOE requirement that I described.
We have a second on that?
this is Dennis, I'll second.
Okay. Any comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
All right. Sticking with this in numerical order. I was gonna talk a little bit about, wanted to touch base on C 405.2.4, which is daylighting responsive controls. I think our last meeting, we touched base on this and we were, well, you know what? Can I turn it over to you? And you can describe it because of the issues with it?
So we got some this is Dennis, we got some comments, particularly from Chris Monrad, who pointed out how difficult it is in the new code. We already in the 2018, there is a requirement for daylight responsive controls. So if you have a room like this with windows, you have a daylight zone that needs to be addressed one way or another. The way it's most often addressed is that the daylight zone is based on the geometry of the window, and it only goes a certain distance into the room, a certain width, and you look at the total wattage of the light that's installed. If you're below that threshold, you don't have to do anything. If you have more lighting in the room, then you have to put equipment in that will automatically dim the lights when there is daylight available to give you the required illumination. So that's a lot of technology. And what's changed in the 2024 compared to what we have in the 2018 is it has reduced the wattage threshold, how many watts you can have before you meet the requirement to put in that technology. And it's done a 2-tier on the limits of the daylighting zone, which means that now you have to put a second sensor in and set a programming to accommodate the 2 zones. So again, we're throwing more and more technology at it. And when you consider other operational requirements of how you might want to switch rooms and things, it's just become so complicated. So there was a proposal that was, put out by a member of public with experience in designing all this stuff that, they just put it too far. So let's drop that. And
That example was primarily classrooms.
yeah, if you had a school classroom where you may need to have teaching zones in a room as well as you now have daylight zones in a room. The teaching zone may not be code required necessarily, but the daylight zone would be. But from an operational point of view, with all the electronics being used, oftentimes you want to dim lighting where you have a TV monitor or such. Your controls get so complicated. And so are we just pushing too far to do this? And I think so that's where the idea came, let's just delete that section. Now, that might be going too far to totally delete the section. So I thought about perhaps there could be an alternative to it, which instead of deleting the entire section, we would just delete subparagraph 1 to C 405.2.4. And that would be the first part of it. And then the second part of it would be to add a statement that daylight responsive control shall not be required in secondary side lit zones. So what that would do is it would back down on the low wattage threshold for the primary lighting zone, the one closer to the window, and make it more similar to we have now with 150 watts instead of 75 watt. And then it would not require us to put that second sensor in, separate dimming for the going deeper in the room. So it kind of holds it more like the daylight zone requirements are right now. So you'd still, you still would be required to put that in certain buildings. And we would also lose another thing that's in the 2018 IECC. In 2018, you can do a calculation that if you actually have reduced lighting power within your daylight areas, you can eliminate the controls entirely. I don't remember seeing that in 2024. So I think it's still going to require more controls to go in, but they can go in a simpler manner and not be made so complicated. And I feel given the difficulties and costs of construction, and we have some of that unique to here, I think it's appropriate we could have an amendment that would mitigate the daylight control.
Clayton?
This is Clayton. I would urge the committee to consider what values these decisions have, which is to say there has been a lot of effort put into developing these codes with data that supports a reduction in energy usage. Some of the proposals that have been made aren't really addressing energy usage directly, monitoring, for example. However, code sections that do reduce the quantity of energy used, okay, are all contributing to that progressive improvement or progressive reduction in energy use in buildings. Simply removing sections of code without data to support how much that is changing, that reduction in energy, can be very difficult to justify. Which is to say, we would discourage you from omitting entire sections of code unless we can quantify what percentage of energy we're saving or not saving with that deletion. So to Dennis's point, simply removing the section entirely might be a little extreme of a move, whereas addressing specific concerns by removing sections of the code that are specifically problematic would be a more encouraged approach.
Well, it seems to me the problem is it's getting overly complex. And are we going to frustrate the end user to the point that they bypass all these systems?
Yeah, this is Dennis again. On that point, Ken prepared quite a number of issues on these options, and I almost think rather than us trying to put a motion out on each individual one, what everything Clayton said sort of applies to all these, and I think maybe we should hear them out first, and then we could go back and individually just do the motion and say whether we think we should go with this or not. And so many of these go directly to what Rick said on the complexity, and I think that's the real failing in the 24 is that they've made the method of both documenting compliance and what you have to build. They've made it so complicated compared to what could be a more simpler prescriptive approach to reduce energy use. And that's going to be a burden on both the design and the building industry, just because of the way they went about chasing those energy savings.
And this is Ken, and I'm all for, just like Dennis was saying on this section, especially this section, coming up with a better way to describe it that's not so complex and make it so impossible, almost impossible to comply in many cases. Okay,
Basically, we're saying is that we're for energy reduction as well. but
Right,
There's
right.
probably a simpler course.
correct,
Than what's in the code.
correct.
Want me to continue with C 405.12 automatic receptacle
Yes.
control?
Yes,
Okay, that's another that Ken put on his list, and that was again brought in by public comment. And I'm pretty sympathetic to getting rid of that section. So what that section is it requires that in mostly office type occupancies, but there are others where the receptacle outlets that are in the room, at least 50% of them have to have automatic control so that when the room doesn't have any occupancy, the power is turned off. And that can be done by either splitting a duplex receptacle where half is switched and the other is live all the time, or you can have a completely switched receptacle that's say within 12 inches of a receptacle that isn't switched. So it's requiring significant equipment to be added into a space, sensors for the occupancy control, which could be shared with lighting controls, but wouldn't necessarily. Control relays to control the receptacles, or a special receptacle device that actually gets a control signal either by wired or wireless means from the sensing portion. Putting that into, every office, every building pretty much all over. And this started in Title 24 in California quite some time ago. And I remember when that went in, the justification was there was significant energy use, particularly computers in offices. They had the big CRT monitors that would be a couple 100 watts each, and people would leave their computers on and the monitors are all glowing all night long, all weekend long. And the thinking was, well, you could plug the monitor into one outlet, and the computer, if maybe does need to stay on for certain reasons, that's in another outlet. That probably did save quite a bit of energy back then because of the inefficiency of those computers. I think what's happened then is there's so much momentum that California put all these requirements into their Title 24 that have made their way into the IECC, and nobody's opening their mouth and saying, wait, guys, what are we doing? Because computers aren't the same anymore. I mean, you take a computer out of the box and it automatically goes to sleep. You have to make a deliberate effort to keep it from going to sleep. Now you can do that.
same with the
But
monitor.
even so, with the monitor, there are all these LED monitors now. You can put your hand on them and they're not even any warmer than just the ambient temperature in the room. Whereas the old CRTs, it was like a little heater was running. We're not wasting the energy as we used to, but now we're putting the requirement in because we got manufacturers that make this stuff and want to sell it, and they're lobbying code panels to do it. That's why I think it's crazy. And if we leave it in there, then we ought to have an amendment that says the contractors to buy a roll of masking tape so people can put it over that switched outlet so they don't inadvertently plug things in.
Yeah, because I can't think of much that would be switched these days. You got refrigerators, you don't want to switch those. Most people don't want to switch their computers off or their TVs off because it takes too long for them to warm up.
Or you have to reprogram
Or
or
you get-
somehow boot things.
Yeah,
up to
or
get
you
it
have-
to work right.
Right, even coffee makers have,
If it's
they're
got a
all,
lock in it.
yeah, you gotta redo the clock or redo the settings on it. So I mean, I just can't think of anything that you'd wanna plug in and have it switch off while you're not there. And so that's what surprises me about this section. And then the occupants would have to know, which one do I plug it to? And
Well, if
now
they're
how many
required to be
extension cords do I need?
The code requires it to be identified. So it
Right.
would have to be identified as being the switched outlet. But again, I think we're mandating technology that is not gonna get used.
Right.
Yet, it's in the code.
Okay, so that one, I don't know if there's a way, I don't think there's a way to modify that one other than just to eliminate it because it,
So that's a proposal. I guess we could go on to.
Right.
Other discussion.
so Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Clayton. I just, final parting comment on that section. I do want to bring to your attention that both the city of Phoenix and the city of Chandler omitted this section entirely from their package. And one of the points that stood out to me during that process that I think is relevant to your discussion is this code gets more to the behavior of people in the buildings that may not necessarily equate to real energy savings and may actually inadvertently cause more problems with the examples that were given here, and also other examples such as public safety professionals that may be charging equipment, leave the room, and the light goes off because the occupant sensor, and then their equipment is no longer being charged. From the very simple experience of just having a phone charger, right? And you leave the room and it stops charging. So I just want to bring that additional context from the other jurisdictions.
Right. The next section that we talked about was section 405.13, which was energy monitoring. And I think this section, you know, I know it's required if it's less than 5,000 square feet, there's you don't have to do it, but even a 6,000 square foot building, I don't know of building managers that even if there is a building manager for that small of a building, it's usually just the office manager, and what they're going to do with this information is nothing. I think the people that do want that information, they could put this stuff in. There's nothing stopping people from doing this. So you can monitor these panels and get the information if you have the personnel to do that, and then guess what? They would want that. So let them provide it. There's nothing stopping people from doing these. And I guess I'm just saying that this mandatory is a major cost that majority of the people that would pay that would receive zero benefit.
So would you change the threshold?
I don't think so. I think I would let the person that
Let the market decide.
decide. You're right. Let the people that are moving in, if they have an office manager or a building manager, not an office manager, building manager, they're going to want it. So let them provide it. But forcing every building to have it, or the occasional, it'd be so rare. And it's usually only on large facilities. I just don't see making it mandatory. And I wouldn't even know what square footage to make it mandatory. So, I mean,
So this is Dennis. Let me just add and provide more information on it. So what do you have to do if you're looking at electrical? So they're wanting to measure multiple things. They want to know the usage of interior light, exterior lighting,
right. 1, 2, 3,
HVAC system,
6,
plug loads, process loads. So what it means is you have to put, most of these are electrically driven things, but there's also requirements. If you had a chilled water building, you might have to put BTU meters on chilled water. You have to have separate gas metering, et cetera. It's not just electrical. There's a lot of metering that would be required. But on the electrical side, let's say you have that 6,000 square foot building. We might build that now with 2 electrical panels. So if you want to implement sub-metering, you have 2 choices. You either put in equipment that looks at each electrical panel, and it basically puts a meter on every single circuit or every group of circuits that are similar things, and gets the data out. Or you segregate into separate electrical panels. So as the building gets a little bit larger, maybe you put just in a lighting panel for interior lighting. You put another electrical panel in for exterior lighting, another for plug loads, et cetera. So, but now you're putting in a lot more electrical panel. So a typical electrical panel might cost $3,000 each. I also just got the cost to put in one of these sub-metering systems. You're probably looking about $3,000 per panel to put in the sub-metering system. But it goes beyond that because I think it not only requires that we have to have the system in, we also have to have a data acquisition system that stores the data for up to 3 years. And you also have to put a dashboard of some kind in, say, the lobby of the building that is displaying the data in real time. So it's throwing all this hardware in there. You know, this requirement originated in Title 24 in California back in the mid-2000s.
And lead.
And well, LEED has it
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
This is the kind of projects that are getting that. And, you know, somebody wants to build a small building for their business. They're gonna spend thousands and thousands of dollars up front to put this system in. Just for the fun of having the dashboard in their office that says, oh geez, look at this, we're using 2,000 watts for the lights.
Right.
And then what do they do with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm opposed to that requirement, and I think it's reasonable to eliminate it.
Did anybody have any comments on that section? Okay, the next section. This is the section C405.15, which is the renewable energy system. This one is really, it's just so poorly written. So it's basically requiring renewable energy on all buildings. They have exceptions, but if they come back and they say, if you take one of these exceptions, now you have to purchase off-site renewable energy. In other words, green power is what I think DEP calls it, right? So you have to have a contract. The contract has to be, I thought it was for 10 years. Yeah, it's a 10-year contract and you can't get out of it. In fact, if you sell your building, that contract has to go with the building. So it's just, it's so, I guess to me, it was just, wow. And by the way, the green power, they stipulate what that rate needs to be. And it's like, I think somebody mentioned it was like 15 times.
Well, so for a given building, if you have on-site renewable energy, it says you have to provide a certain amount based on the size, the square footage of the building. The amount of renewable energy off-site that you would have to purchase is 15 times what you would be required to build on your building.
Yeah. So in other words, they're mandating you to purchase all this energy, which is just,
So either spend your money to put, probably in our area, a solar voltaic power system on the building. I suppose somebody could do wind power if they wanted to do
Right.
that. I'm not sure. We don't have continuously running streams to do hydro or whatever. So yeah, it's gonna be mostly solar. Or spend probably more money
that's what they're trying to get you to
that
do.
goes to off-site solar. And I think it also says that whatever you're buying in, it has to somehow, you can prove that that energy is getting through the utility to your building.
Right. So anyways, this one is just, I just think it needs to be removed. It is.
And Phoenix, I know, is proposing.
Yeah,
to
Phoenix has
remove it.
proposed to remove it also, yeah.
Phoenix and Chandler.
And Chandler, yeah.
So just going back,
Jim Myers here, and most of the country, as I'm
Yeah.
working in other states, yeah. Putting in some simple words to keep the language there and say where required or something, but removing that renewable energy requirements for commercial buildings.
And it could have been written so much better. But it's just, I think trying to rewrite it it's better just to remove it.
I'm not sure it could be rewritten better. I think it's the underlying requirement itself is the question whether a building code should be mandating that technology. It may be that we need to go there for climate change reasons and whatever, but is the building code the place to do it? And I don't know, I think politics have definitely crept into the code on this issue.
Right. So any comments on that one? Okay. The next one is section C 406.1. This is the one where I was saying is so complex and it is basically written like lead. It splits it asks for like 9 building categories. And then of each category, you get, and based on your region, you have to achieve certain number of additional points. And then there are 32 options you have, and each option has a point value. And so it gets to be very complex. And so I think forcing this on, and so the first part of that section is 406.1, where it talks about if you're greater than 2,000 square feet, you have to meet the requirements of 406.1.1, which is all those credits. And then the next part is buildings greater than 5,000 square feet now have to also meet 406.1.2, which has to do with the load management questions, options, which is a whole nother slew of options and depends on your building category, your 9 building categories, you get certain number of points that you have to achieve, and you got now you only have like 10 options for load management. But load management is you have to get a signal from your utility provider that you're getting close to your demand. And then you have to start load shedding. That load shedding could be in lighting, it could be in HVAC where you raise your temperatures set points, it could be in thermal storage, it could be in, and they give you these like 10 different options on different ways to shed loads. And but you're gonna have to use at least a couple of those just to get the points you need to meet code. So, and we've done this stuff, but usually on lead projects and not being mandatory for a building as small as 5,000 square feet or 5,100
square foot deep buildings.
Right. So, and the technology to implement systems.
That's small.
The brains, but I mean, the brains to operate this system, the cost of all that is the same for a 5,000 square foot building as it is for the 75,000 square foot
Correct.
building. Now, you may need more hardware in the bigger building,
Right.
but you still have this core cost of just implementing things.
Right, and I know they're trying to get it, more smaller commercial size stuff for it, but it's still the equipment costs and the management costs, and now you need that's why they're basically requiring a building manager now to be able to operate your building. Because it has all this technology in it. And that's where I'm just feeling that that's excessive.
Well, the adoption of this is going to impact the built environment. It's
Yes.
just not gonna be cost effective to build a 6,000 square foot building.
Correct.
You have to meet all these requirements.
Right.
So it's gonna eliminate a lot of those projects in our community, and we'll have large buildings. I
Right.
don't think that's conducive to the built environment in Tucson, having a bunch of large buildings.
Right, so,
But it has planning impacts as well as the technical.
right.
impact.
So my first thought on all of 601, 406.1 was to just eliminate it. It's 45 pages. It's very complex. It's very cumbersome. By the way, as far as, I didn't check today, but ComCheck, as far as I know, still has not developed a program to document compliance. So, I'm just scratching, because I was gonna say, well, I'll try it, but just going through and doing it by hand on each of these
Terrible.
is an enormous effort. That's why I was hoping, you know, there would be some program to use, but not yet. So anyway, so if we don't delete it and we decide to keep it, that's where I was thinking, because you know, we do some of these things naturally anyways on very large facilities. So if you got 100,000 square foot building, unless it's a storage facility, but storage facilities realize that their point totals are much smaller. So if you got 100,000 square foot building, you do some of these things anyways. And they have more finance, a bigger pot of money, because now their building's costing millions. And if what you're adding is, you know, 10, 20,000, it's a smaller percentage of the building
Well,
costs.
the operation costs are significantly higher.
Correct.
So
Correct.
Than the payoff.
So what I was recommending, if we decide to keep this section, was we modify the 2,000 square foot requirement to be 50,000 square feet. And we modify the 5,000 square foot requirement to be 100,000 square feet. The way I came up with that is I just started looking at what type of building would typically, where would the construction, the budget of a building need to be at, so that this stuff is not going to be dramatically impacting the construction costs. And that's kind of how I came up with those numbers. Is I was just looking at the added cost to do these things, you know, it would be where it's at.
And how does that relate to the information that the city and county provided on the project?
Right, so that, with what they provided, I have it here, sorry. I've got so much paper, yeah, I read it and wrote it, here, I got it here, and wrote it. So the 50,000 square foot, let me see, this is for the city. 50,000 square feet, or less than 50,000 square feet is, how did I do this? I'm sorry. Give me a minute. Okay, so less than 50,000 square feet, you had 269 projects permitted. In other words, 78% of your total permitted over a 2-year period, right? 23 and 24, 78% of your buildings were less than 25,000 square feet. And it was 70, 88, almost 98% of the buildings were less than 50,000 square feet in the city over the last, not 98, I'm sorry. I'd have to do the math. It's, well, of the 344, all but 25 projects were less than 50,000 square feet. And county was similar. 84% of their projects are less than, are 25,000 square feet or less. For 50,000 square feet, it was only another 4 projects. So in other words, 124 out of 143 over the last 2 years were, or it's actually more over the last 6 years. So in other words, if we're going to do 50,000 square feet or larger, the county gets about 4 of those per year, and the city gets about, for 50,000 square feet and larger, about 13 per year. Of their projects they see. For 100,000 square feet and larger, the city sees about 6%, 6 projects per year, and the county only sees about 1 per year. I'm sorry, they see 2 per year for 100, for greater than 100,000 square feet, only 1 per year for the county. So that's kind of where that fits in with the number of projects they have.
just
So
to
it-
clarify, I did the math for you, Ken.
Thank you.
It's 92.7%.
Thank
of
you.
the city's buildings are less than 50,000 square feet, commercial buildings.
Correct.
We don't get many 50,000 square foot houses.
So,
I just wanted to clarify that those numbers excluded 1 and 2 family dwellings.
right. Yeah, and I think the counties also
Yes,
exclude that. They're just for commercial buildings.
correct.
So in other words, what changing those values would do is make it very rare that we would have a building that would need this. So it's
That's
essentially
required
would
to
be,
put it in.
it essentially would be the same as deleting. You could still do all these things, but I'm putting the numbers so high that it's essentially it's close to deleting it. And I guess I'm doing that only because just the amount of, I was looking at the total construction dollars and thinking that you're also gonna, if you got that much construction dollars going into a building, you probably will have a building manager. And you probably will have somebody that may want this stuff to be able to manage it. And so then if somebody's managing it, then that's where you're gonna see the energy savings. If nobody's managing it, you're just not gonna see it. And so for a smaller building, a 10,000 square foot building, for instance, we do a lot of those office buildings that are 10,000 square feet and they just lease out the space and nobody's, the renters aren't managing their office space and the leaser definitely is not managing it. And so I just didn't see that happening. Whereas the bigger square footages is where I start seeing now it's usually operated and owned by the same individual. And that's where the big energy savings is gonna come into play. So,
Comments on this? From the construction contractor, commercial contractor?
This is Greg. To Ken's point, I think the only people that are gonna want to do this are developers that are building to put buildings so that they can have that data, you know, to get the next owner of the building and those that are managing the building. I mean, we adopt the code as is, we'll have to hire a building manager for our room additions on our houses.
Not quite. But what do you think about these breaks on the square footage?
I think it's spot on.
Any other comments?
Clayton. Yeah.
Clayton does.
Mr. Chair, committee members, this is Clayton with the city of Tucson. Just want to point out also that the title of section 406, C406 is additional efficiency, renewable and load management requirements. So we've talked a lot about renewables and we've talked a lot about load management, but I haven't heard much discussion about the efficiency side of this, which takes me back to one of my initial comments. This code has been designed to decrease energy usage, although some of the provisions don't directly address energy consumption. Renewables, for example, don't address energy consumption. And really the intent of the Energy Conservation Code is to reduce energy consumption. So I just want to point out that by entirely removing 406 and or raising the threshold, we are addressing the load management and the renewable discussions that we've had so far, but we're not addressing the more efficient equipment or the building thermal envelope requirements or other provisions of 406 that are not related to load management and renewables. So I just want to also point that out, right? That by removing this section entirely, we do not know what impact it will have on the reduction of efficiency of buildings because this section is included in that calculation that NPPL and others have prepared that demonstrate that this new code does reduce the energy consumption of buildings.
and and this is Ken Cawthorn, and I agree with you, and maybe it's that section, that paragraph 2, which is the one requiring the load management. Maybe that one is the one that just needs to be raised to the extreme, which is why I raised it to the extreme I did. But without knowing, I guess my thought is I guess when ComCheck comes out, I mean, we decided we're gonna meet quarterly to review this, and we could adjust these values, is my thought, as we go and start stepping into it. But I just don't know how to, I mean, each of these 32 options have, some of them are, you get the full value, some of them you can get up to like 10 times the value. Some of them you get like, you have to prorate it, so you only get like a portion of the value. So there's complexities to each and every one of these 32 items. And some of them, you know, one of the items you have to do an energy model. So it's not, they're not simple items, and that's, and it was, and so that's what had me concerned about requiring it on such a low number. And maybe 50,000 is too high, but I think it's a starting point, that we can reduce it down to get some more buildings in there. And I mean, there's a big jump in numbers once we get below 50,000.
Well, on the management, it's a question of, are you providing something to a client that's not gonna be able to utilize it?
Right,
And at what point is that cutoff?
right. And so that, and let's face it, if we're doing a 10,000 square foot building and it's owner operated, he may want to do these things anyways, but we're letting it be up to, yeah, it's optional. It's up to him. It's not, we're not saying you can't do this.
Because it does him no good if he's not willing to take advantage of the management system,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Dennis?
Yeah, it's Dennis. I think it's almost a two-step argument in trying to address where Clayton went on it. If we go back to the IECC in 2018, we'd still have the requirement for additional energy savings. And we had, I believe, 9 categories where we could select those. Presently, most projects pick one of those categories, and it's relatively benign and easy to implement because it's a prescriptive, put a factor on your lighting wattage and we're done. I think a big part of my concern is that the method in 406 is so convoluted and so complicated, it's going to drive up design costs significantly. And I'm not sure that we have the personnel in our Tucson-Pima County area to even do all this design and analysis work and to be able to support the amount of construction that's happening. I think it could really slow things down because it's going to take, I think it could take as much time to analyze this energy side as it's taken to design an entire building, especially on small buildings. On big buildings, it becomes a smaller part of the design process. So what would be better for us would be a solution if we needed additional energy savings, is to come up with some simple prescriptive way of saying, put a factor on something, make the insulation a certain percent better, or make the lighting a 50% better, make the mechanical a certain percent better. So maybe those SEER 2 values need to take a next jump.
Right.
Or maybe the lighting numbers, which by the way, the basic numbers in the book have gone down significantly for most usages compared to the 2018. So, you know, are we not going to get any savings at all? I think we will get, say, on the lighting side. If we wanted to stay with the idea that we still need an additional thing, maybe there needs to be factors, but how do we pick those numbers? I don't know where to go.
And that's what
be pulling them out of the sky. So I think, you know, we don't have the guidance to know about how simple compliance can be when ComCheck finally comes out. So is a solution instead of us trying to think too hard into this, do we either delay the IECC until we get more answers and just stay with the 2018, at least we haven't gone down, or we could go to the 2024, delete these sections that are, to me, seem almost impossible to deal with, especially on small projects. And, it's kick the can down the road, but once we learn more and we can see more examples of how buildings are done and software is available, maybe then we got to go over this all again and decide if it's still appropriate or if it's just coming into a complicated mess.
Right, and this is Ken, and so the problem I see is that if I'm the building owner and I tell him, okay, you can get I've got 32 options, 32 items here, and you need to do a random 4 of them. He's gonna say, well, he's gonna ask, what are the costs of each one of these options? Well, I've got 32 things I need to price out every time. And as of right now, I don't know what those costs are. Now, after I think practicing this for a while, we would get to understand, well, don't even look at this item. Don't even look at, the next 16. And so we get it narrowed down to 16 items that we tend to concentrate on. Sort of like what's happened with the 2018. We concentrate on the lighting and mechanical for the most part, because those were less burdensome and less costly to deal with. But at this point, and with the fact that they have point values associated with them, going more efficient lighting, but the point value may be so small that it's not worth it, or the point value may be so small and getting a higher efficiency mechanical that it's not worth it. So it's just things like that I don't know what those
I'm
numbers
having
are
trouble
yet.
seeing where do you get all your points?
Right.
Jim here, because most of Arizona has skipped the 2021. They didn't see these tables that came,
Right.
not as many tables, you're right.
10.
Tables came in the 2021 and ComCheck implemented that capability. So it's usable. It's been usable for the last 3 years. And when they finish 2024 ComCheck, it'll be usable too. I can't imagine, and I'm not a ComCheck expert, it can be much difference between what you see in the 21 ComCheck and the 24 ComCheck. But they've already implemented this type of
Correct.
application, these tables.
But if we move forward, this is supposed to be implemented in July.
Yeah.
The schedule,
That's the target.
is ComCheck gonna be ready in July?
Not that I understand. Yeah, we can't even talk to PNNL right now with all the stuff going on in Washington, so.
Right.
So,
They're not saying
the
anything.
designers aren't gonna have the tools with ComCheck.
They might be developing it, for all I know. Well, they were.
Right. So right now, we don't know. And that's what I'm saying is the 50,000 and the 100,000 square feet is sort of kicking the can down the road. It's saying that if we do have, if we're that large, then I know the construction budget is gonna be, I pretty well know what that range is gonna be. And so therefore, the design fees are gonna be large enough that they can absorb this extra, or
They're
this
gonna
extra
go up.
charge.
They're
They're
still
gonna go up, right?
But
it's not gonna be
smaller percentage compared to what it
correct.
would be on a.
So
small
like
one.
on a 5,000 square feet, this would more than double the cost. It'd probably be, if the cost of the design was $5,000, it'd probably be $25,000 to just do this. And so, but if the cost of design is $100,000 and this is $25,000, it's getting closer. If the cost is now of 500,000 and this is 25,000, it's getting closer. And that's what I was trying to get to, is that this added cost, because you're gonna have almost the same added cost, whether it's 100,000 square feet or whether it's 5,000 square feet. Yeah, it's gonna be a little bit more, but it's still there. You have to go through these 32 options that you have to understand them, and you have to figure out what impact it has on your building. So that's kind of how I came up with those values.
Which is why you don't have a 5,000 square foot big building.
Correct.
Cost to comply is to whatever the size of the building.
Right. And so if we change these numbers, then it impacts other areas. And I kind of tried to address those too. So,
This is Dennis. How about, just considering another approach, which would be to hold off on compliance with 406 until a certain amount of time after, say, the comm check is available for documentation, say like 180 days after the comm check becomes available, which would then give time for projects to get the software, get the.
we could run it through an example.
You could actually, time to learn and use it and then implement it on projects. Cause I don't know right now if we're gonna have a set of plans that go into the building department after July 1st, what are we gonna have to do to demonstrate compliance? And what is the city gonna be looking for? Without a structure for that somehow, it's gonna be a real rough time, I think, to get a set of plans approved, which means people aren't gonna be able to build anything under this scope. So maybe it needs, I think it needs to be stepped, where we could delay it in time.
And then,
And let, if we have to adopt 2024, we can do parts of it, but this complicated analysis, I don't think we're all ready for that.
I mean, that's essentially what I was trying to do with the square footage numbers. Is make it so that it's, but like you said, what if, so if we get a 100,000 square foot building. Now we have to go through and document as best we can, because ComCheck isn't available yet. And then sit down with the authority, have a jurisdiction, and see if they are in agreement with how we documented it.
Well, I mean, our problem is providing something to the Board of Supervisors and Mayor and Council that they can adopt. They tend to be more on the sustainability side and more willing to push the envelope. Maybe this committee is. So the question is, what can we give them that they can live with? I don't know, eliminating the section is gonna fly with Mayor and Council or Board of Supervisors. Maybe Clayton and Dan had some insight on that.
Well, this is Dan. I think you're right there, Rick. I think both the county and the city are leaning more towards the sustainability, energy savings type stuff.
They're willing to push hard on that.
We're probably willing to push hard on that. I think, and I don't know for sure, but I think the sections that, possibly, Phoenix and Chandler eliminated, we wouldn't have a hard time getting concurrence with that. I do like Ken's idea of like square footage deals. So we're not eliminating 406.1, but we're limiting the size of the building needs to be on. And I think that would tie in with what Dennis was saying, was we step it, that would be the step. Do we start lowering the square footage thresholds in 406.1? But we wouldn't start doing that until the comm chat came out and you guys and us had something we could
Try it out.
try it out with.
Right.
So that's my thoughts. I'm not sure what City Clayton's are.
So I can't speak for mayor and council until we have specified direction from them. I will say that we have a very progressive elected body that is very interested in sustainability. We've got the RECCE grants, we've got a climate action plan locally. There is a lot of initiative, to be very environmentally and climate conscious in Tucson. My impression is that they are looking forward to adopting the 24 IECC. But again, like I said, we don't have any direct guidance yet because we haven't gone before them with a package to approve or deny the adoption of the code. As it relates to a stepped approach, just keep in mind that we could implement like a delayed implementation where, say all of the other codes take effect July 1 and that 24 energy code takes effect September 1. That's something that we can recommended right into the adopting ordinance. We can't really adopt in the phased approach of what I've been hearing to change the thresholds, for example, to say you recommend a 50,000 square foot, 100,000 square foot threshold for buildings to comply. That would take effect until we go back before mayor and council and they change it, which means we would have to go back through the process to go before mayor and council to reduce those numbers. Can't really bake in a staged reduction that I'm aware of through the adopting ordinance. It would require another session
It
before
would
the
take
elected
another,
body.
it would take another adoption in the county also if we reduced what we adopted originally. Clayton's idea of adopting everything except for the energy code. If we could get concurrence. Like Clayton said, I can't speak for the board, but I think we have enough justification to say why we think we need to do a little more.
Well, if we don't have the software tools.
Yeah, tools aren't
That's a
available.
legitimate
Exactly.
concern.
Exactly.
I think we're in concurrence on the sections that Phoenix and Chandler have removed, that we can remove those. We can justify that. We can justify delaying implementation of the energy code. What, until September? Do we know when
This
we're
is
gonna
Jeff,
get that?
I mean, I think quite honestly, it should be January, because the software comes out, then design professionals need some time to acclimate themselves to it, to be able, and really start to have conversation with owners of budgeting and those kinds of things, and where all that comes in. And we're gonna need more time than 3 months to really,
Well-
to me, in my mind, kind of execute that.
Well, as complex as this is, it's gonna take longer for Comcheck to implement the software than
Well,
it did in previous version.
What we're concerned about, as what I heard here too, is that, yeah, it may get nixed. Comcheck may not provide anything with the way things are going right now politically.
They have a statutory requirement.
Right,
So I think that will go through.
okay,
Timing wise, I couldn't tell you. but
right.
They're mandated.
Yeah, we don't know when they're gonna
Right, that's the.
publish that, right?
But I would
Projected
think,
September 1st and it's still not.
I would think 2 or 3 months after it's been published would be sufficient time for us to
Right,
try it-
give yourself
try it
90 days
out.
to
Take an
work
example,
through and-
right?
Yep.
And try to figure out, okay, this is a,
You're gonna have to train your staff on
Right.
how to, the software, and,
right,
you know, that's a process that.
right.
But you can't write an ordinance that implements this 90 days after Comcheck is.
Especially if we don't know when it's gonna come.
Correct.
Be released.
Right.
But how can we in good conscience adopt an ordinance when we don't have a real good way of implementing it? I think it's
Well, I
gonna,
think,
Out of
I think we
curiosity.
justified the delay. It's just a question of
Right.
what that date is.
And this is Clayton. We could also receive additional guidance by taking the other codes that we've already agreed upon forward, right? And getting the conversation started with mayor and council so that they can give us additional feedback.
I guess, sorry to interrupt, but my thought is that if they're gonna have to go back to mayor and council to adopt this later anyways, why couldn't we then adopt or change the numbers later anyway? At least it adopts it. Cause there's a lot of things in here that if we don't adopt it, what value, how do people, what insulation value do they use on walls? Do they not insulate walls? Do they not insulate roofs? Do they
we
not?
don't repeal the 2018 and stay with 2018.
So,
If we didn't adopt the 24 IECC, the 2018 would
Okay.
stay in effect.
all right.
But if you are in agreement on sections that could be removed, that you would still support the adoption of the 24 IECC, that is information that the council would definitely want to hear.
Yeah, I mean, just keep in mind, we don't approve this. We
Right.
only make recommendations to mayor
Right,
and council
right.
board of supervisors. They approve it.
Right.
So we gotta give them recommendations that they can live with.
Exactly. And they could also change any number of things during that process to adopt. They could accept or deny your recommendations for any portions.
Who would the mayor council rely on? Because this is pretty technically,
They're relying on you.
okay. Okay, well, not adopting is, it's not gonna work. That recommendation won't work.
So what would happen if we adopted it with these changes? And we get, and it's a small, even the smaller buildings, how would you go through the showing that we comply with all this? I mean, it's still a pretty hefty book, right? So without a comp check, how do you?
You know, I think you have to delay it at least to the end of the year.
That's what I'm wondering, because you as the building officials, how would you go about it? You just have to trust how it's, because there is no presentation on how to present this other than comp check. So we'd have to go through and, you know, paragraph by paragraph, show you that, yeah, we comply here, we comply here. It'd be
So
really,
I can speak to that,
hard.
this Dennis, just on the electrical side, generally speaking, I don't use ComCheck in my drawings.
right,
I prepared my own schedules stating compliance. And that's been on our plans going all the way back to maybe the 2006 code adoption.
right.
We've taken our own schedules and we
Show
do for
compliance.
interior lighting, exterior lighting and other things. And that has been accepted the whole time. So, but it's something we developed in-house.
Right.
And we're used to doing it, and I never did move to ComCheck as that became better, but I just never went there because our own was working fine. But I mean, we can develop our own. So I'm not afraid, lighting wise, I would do the same thing. I gotta rework everything to what this requires, but we would do that on our side. I don't know though if that's feasible for other elements of building envelope
The
and.
question is, how does it, for the viewer, because you get ComCheck, it's either green or it's not.
Right.
Yeah, from the city's perspective, I would say the burden is much higher on the applicant than the reviewers. We'll find a way, okay? The worst result that I can imagine is increased number of submittals as we bounce back and forth between the applicant. But you know, as far as the review staff, we'll be able to review it. It will be much more difficult for the applicant if they don't have access to ComCheck.
And yeah, and for, I mean, mechanical and architectural side, I think we could, just like we do, you know, there were the old prescriptive method where you just show, yeah, we meet the tables, right? So, and I'm sure that's
what we're doing, that's what
electrical
we're
is
doing
too.
with our own,
Yeah.
with our own table.
So we could probably document on the small, so long as we raise or either eliminate or raise 406, we can document all that fairly easily.
Yeah, it's 406 that really
That-
throws a
Yeah,
monkey wrench in.
because again, the 32 options there, you have to go
I'm
through.
not sure we can eliminate 406 that will pass mayor council. Eliminate it.
Right. Or you could go ahead and increase the square footages.
I think that's more of a reasonable, that's being more acceptable to council.
And now it's really justified because the documentation is by hand, you know, it's going through each and every option and coming up with your own calculations based on, or using those calculations and showing that in some format that's acceptable. Because we don't have a canned program. So I guess, is there concern that if we kick this down the road until after ComCheck comes out, is somebody gonna say, no, we don't want to just stay with the 2018 energy, we want the 2024 energy? Is there, I mean, would that be something that we'd be, that somebody
Quite sure I
could-
understand what you're saying.
the city or the county or some other jurisdiction within Pima County, you know, Oro Valley, Sarita could say, we don't want to kick this down the road. We want to adopt it now.
Well, I would assume they would have the same issues.
Okay,
I assume they have their own code committees, sorry to.
No.
No?
no, they're looking at,
They're relying on-
us.
they're relying
yeah,
on us.
they might be on.
No pressure, guys.
Yeah. So they're waiting for us to make that decision.
Well, I think we can justify the delayed adoption.
Okay.
End of the year. Where you can remove the two sections at Phoenix and Chandler. And then the other one is the threshold square footage.
Yep.
I have no idea how mayor, council, or supervisor react to those thresholds.
What we would do, though, is take your suggestions for the IRC, we would have to them
Correct.
set code.
Yep.
And this is Clayton. I also want to point out there's one more item that we haven't talked about that I think we
Yeah.
should probably cover quite quickly. That's the recommendation for C 502.2, which we talked about previously about non-conditioned space.
Yep.
And there's a proposal here to add an additional exception for evaporative cooled buildings. I would also just like to point out that there's a definition in the energy code for conditioned area. And it specifically calls out heating or cooling. So I also want to point out that like this exception probably isn't necessary. at all,
Correct. Yeah.
Because
Just a clarification.
if it's evaporative cooled, it most likely is already heated. Unless it's a non-conditioned building that has evaporative cooling, which they wouldn't be putting air conditioning on. So I just want to acknowledge the validity of the proposal, okay? Because changing from evaporative cooling to air conditioning does not invoke section 502, okay? But I want to draw the committee's attention back to the actual definition because I think that actually solves it.
It does. It does. My concern is some jurisdictions may not, or some code officials may not agree with that interpretation because they may say that evaporative cooling is not conditioning the space, but it is. And that's where I guess I just wanted to clarify it and make it so it's clear.
Officials here, so.
Well, but no, not necessarily. We still have Marana and Sarita and
But we're
and
not, we're not.
Oro Valley. Because they do look at what we adopt.
Okay.
They do look at what Pima County adopts and they either take that or modify it. They usually modify it somewhat, but it's still pretty much what
becomes their baseline of what
Yeah.
they're doing.
yeah, it makes their decisions. So that's the reason why I guess I wanted to point it out, is there are other HJs that might not agree with what the definition of cooling is. And I totally agree that evaporative cooling is cooling. So
Hence the name.
hence the name, right? It is air conditioning, but so that, yeah. It is conditioned. So that's the thing is that say, no, it's not air conditioning. That's an air conditioning system, but it is conditioning the space. And that's what I guess I'm just trying to point out there.
One other thing, this Dennis, in the IRC section R408 is an additional energy savings options. I think that's in the N1103.
Yeah.
So it's a lot less points that you need. It looks
Correct.
like a lot easier to get.
And it
but
was.
Is there any point in
I
thinking
thought
of
that those.
along with everything else? that
No,
we're
I
talking
thought those
about?
were very reasonable. It's kind of like the 2021. I think they were very reasonable. It wasn't a big.
It's pretty easy to understand.
Yeah,
compared to
even the
rest of this.
2021 is very reasonable. There's 10 options. They're very easy to go through. And it was very easy to understand. The 32 options, and some of them are partial credits, some of them are more than, you get a lot more points than what the credit even says, and it's just
Overly complicated.
it is very complicated. compared to even compared to the 21. And that's, I think, what makes it challenging. So you have to really understand it.
Jim here, and on R408, that's prescriptive, so when.
Yeah.
The builders are building performance and they're going Energy Star and getting utility incentives, then that doesn't even apply.
Right.
So curious, what I've heard is really focused on option 3 that Ken has proposed, because option 2 doesn't completely eliminate 406. Option 3 changes the size threshold. Okay. Other than that, it appears that options 2 and 3 are the same.
Yeah.
So as a parting decision for today, I would be curious if there's a motion for option 3.
Well, maybe we need to back up just a bit because perhaps we need to hit all the pieces.
Okay.
And are they in or are they out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that almost starts with the C405 2.4 daylight responsive controls. And I've suggested an alternative to that, which only.
And I would agree with that.
That mitigated.
And I would agree with that.
Secondary.
Yep.
Zone and the first, eliminated subparagraph 1 to C405.2.4. And we would add that daylight responsive controls shall not be required in secondary side lit zones. So that would be the change to.
And I would agree with that.
So I'd make that motion that we would accept that.
Yep.
Okay, have a second?
I second that. Yep.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Let's knock these out one by one.
Okay. Eliminating 405, 12, 13, and 15.
Automatic receptacle control, energy monitoring, and renewable energy systems.
And so I make the motion to remove those sections.
Second,
It's Dennis, I will second.
any comment? Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
So then we're in C406. I'll make them, if we're gonna pass this code and not kick it down for a while, I would make the motion that we go ahead and put these square footage numbers that I've written in there in section 406.1, paragraphs 1, 2, and 3, as I've got shown in there.
Which are, so Clayton can write them down here.
Which are 50,000, for paragraph 1, it's 50,000 square foot limit, and for paragraph 2, it was 100,000 square foot limit, and for paragraph 3, it was 50,000 square foot.
So that's our motion. Second,
This is Dennis, I'll second.
any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
All right, then I'll just go through the rest of my comments here. Section C 407.2, I wanted to remove the last 2 sentences and also modify the equation that was in it. To make it so that the energy model doesn't have to be 20% better or 25% better than somewhere, or 22 or whatever it is percent better than the than what's required. And that's how I've kind of changed that. The last 2 sentences had to do with had to do with the on-site renewable energy and all that. It took all that out as the last 2 sentences of that. See, let me just go back to that. C4.
I can read it for you.
Yeah.
So the last 2 sentences, of 407.2 state the reduction in energy cost of the proposed design associated with on-site renewable energy shall not be more than 5% of the total energy cost. The amount of renewable energy purchased from off-site sources shall be the same as the standard reference design in the proposed design. And then your modification to the calculation would effectively make the simulated building performance the same as the other performances.
Right. And so the reason I took that out is because if somebody wants to have, they're saying they're not giving you the credit on the energy model if you have renewable energy. And I kept thinking, well, why aren't you getting the credit for that? And so it just didn't seem to make sense. And maybe I misunderstood it, but that's how I interpreted that. So that's why I wanted to take those two sentences out. Okay. So I motion to modify, to remove those last two sentences and change the equation as noted.
Okay. Have a second?
Dennis again, I'll second.
All right.
I guess we're stuck with it.
Let's vote on this, Ken.
The next one, see,
Ken,
huh?
Oh,
we got a motion, we need to vote.
Oh,
Hang on. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
I'm just trying to keep rolling, man.
You're on a roll, Ken.
The next one was C408. Just to let you know, this is a mandatory requiring for maintenance and systems commissioning and things like that. I know we're running out of time here and I know everybody wants to go. Basically, it's my understanding that the city of Phoenix also removed this section and because it's a burden. It's a very large burden to document all this and show it all as costs involved and everything else. So they just removed it.
To clarify, the city of Phoenix made it optional, and the
Yes.
city of Chandler did not modify this section.
So
Chandler
we,
did not.
so why don't we can make it optional? You want to do that? Just follow.
What does it mean to make it optional?
It's still there.
Essentially
it's-
removing it.
Yeah, it's the same as deleting
You
it.
know, if it was optional, why would you do it?
Yeah,
Well, I mean, it's, all this is still there, whether.
right.
We need to say it's optional.
I don't know.
I just wanted to clarify what the other cities did.
Yeah, they did make it optional. Yeah. Because they thought it was a good idea, but they didn't want to make it mandatory, which I tend to agree with.
Okay, so
So I will say that by leaving it in there and making it optional, if someone does it, they would have to follow the sections identified. Right, so you don't have to do it, but if you do it, you have to follow the rules.
Then I would say that we remove this section.
as opposed to making it optional.
Is that a motion?
Yes, so I make the motion that we remove this section because we do a lot of commissioning of buildings and I don't think we want to make it this written like this. So,
This is Dennis, I'll second.
Okay. The motion is to remove it. And not make it optional.
correct.
Okay, that's the motion. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. You're on a roll, Ken.
Okay. Next one was the one Clayton was talking about, C502.2. This has to do with existing buildings where you are modifying them from, let's say they are evap cooled to air conditioned. So, and the biggest one that I see is schools. They typically don't have their walls insulated because they wanted brick walls or block walls to be, durable, right? And now all of a sudden they have to, if they increase their energy use, there's a section in there in increasing energy use, and that's been that's been removed. So the 24 code is actually pretty clear that you don't have to do anything. And you don't have to make these dramatic changes to your building. If you were evaporative cooled. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that evaporatively cooled is space conditioning. And that's all I'm trying to do is,
Meaning the building already has space conditioning.
it already has
So you
space
can look
conditioning.
At it from that point of view.
Correct,
As opposed to a building that had no space conditioning. Then
Correct.
You'd have to improve the envelope.
so that's all I was trying to do is make it clear, and maybe there's a better way to do that. But I just am I wanted to point that out.
So you just want to make it clear that evaporative cool space is cooled space per code.
Right.
It's defined as conditioned space.
Right. So the way, yeah, because 502.2, let me just get there, sorry.
That seems logical to me. Is that an issue with other building code officials?
It doesn't appear to be an issue, it's just redundant.
Right.
Nothing wrong with redundant. So do we want to, how do we want to address that then?
So I wanted to go ahead and put it in as an amendment so that it is redundant, but it makes it clear that it is a conditioned space.
We don't have a definition of conditioned space.
We do.
We do.
So would we just add bath cool that are conditioned?
So I think this is Clayton. I think to Ken's point is not everyone automatically go back to the definition of conditioned space. Because the definition is really quite clear, in my opinion. It says an area, room, or space that's enclosed within the building thermal envelope and is directly or indirectly heated or cooled. I can go on, but that's.
Is there a
that
definition
covers it.
for cool?
I don't think so. No.
No,
Because isn't that, what I'm hearing is that someone may not consider evaporative cooling as the building being cooled. You know,
I'm also-
refrigerated air conditioning be required for that.
I'm also pointing out that it says heated or cooled. So schools have heaters in
So
them.
they would already have the heat in.
So it already qualifies as conditioned space because it's heated.
that's
Or it
true.
has the capacity to be
Yeah,
heated.
well, don't
So I
most
could-
buildings that are evap cooled also have some kind of heating?
Yes,
Every occupiable space is required to have heating, which
Now.
counts as conditioned.
Now, but there could be old buildings that are, say, an automotive repair shop or some warehouse building that is evap cooled, may not have the heating in it. And now they want to throw air conditioning on that building. Would that get caught up into this?
Quite possibly,
yeah,
because those buildings may also qualify as low energy use buildings.
Yeah, already, because, yeah.
Right. Which is part of this section, 502.2 says unconditioned or low energy use buildings.
yes.
Which is to say that if you've got a giant warehouse that has no insulation in it and you want to put air conditioning in it, we would require it to be insulated.
I'm actually thinking kind of the other kind of building where maybe you have like a warehouse tacked on behind a building that's already got air conditioning, but the warehouse doesn't even have heating in it because it was just storage space. And now suddenly the business expands and they want to move people back there and they just want to throw the air conditioning on.
But I don't know if
it's
that's
not-
considered a conditioned space.
Yes. So then this article would never even,
Well, but what if
Caught
they
up.
had evap cooling because they
Yeah.
had product in there or something
yeah,
like
so it
that?
might have had evap cooling, but no heating.
Right.
And probably doesn't have any insulation or very minimal insulation.
So I run into buildings where they're factories inside them. So they didn't have heat because they got all this equipment in there, but they had evap cooling. So now with our climate change, they want to air condition it. So now where does that fall into, right? Because they don't have the heating, but they have the cooling because the heating is provided by all their equipment. So where does that fall into? So I guess that's where I'm struggling a bit.
Yeah, does it give a loophole where they could-
Definition of it's evap.
And it's not so much, the roof insulation, because that's an easy one. If you don't have any roof insulation, the amount of air conditioning you're gonna need is so high that it's gonna be better to pay for the roof insulation than ever get the amount of air conditioning you need. It's the wall insulation that's the big one. And that's why in existing buildings, the thing that's changed a lot, I noticed, is they're not requiring you to insulate the buildings in most of these options, other than this one part in section 502, which is really under additions. So it's just a weird place to put it, but it's the one loophole that I think it could get to be challenging. So that's where I'm struggling is, there's a lot of factories that, they can't, their occupants now are complaining so much that it's, because it's just not conditioned. They had just tilt up walls, and so they don't meet it, or they were a metal building with just R19, which now doesn't meet it. So
either, but a contractor or an engineer that gets called in because of to do this project.
right,
And they're not doing any other building improvements, so it's
Right.
really just the mechanical conversion.
yep,
I think you'd both advise if that roof isn't good enough because all that heat load, you're gonna have to do that, or there's no point in putting air
Correct,
conditioning.
correct.
But you're looking for
For
a
the
way to
walls.
mitigate the requirement to actually build up the walls to new code requirement. Because that could be really expensive and difficult because of existing things that are on all those walls.
Correct.
Or things like a school where it's a masonry wall and you don't want to fur it out because now it's got drywall that can get dinged up and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So that's the kind of case that I'm thinking of where I don't know how to I don't know how to make that so that it's not that huge of a burden, because they need to change that space to condition, but they don't need to necessarily upgrade all their walls.
And this is Clayton. I just making sure that we're talking about all sides of this conversation, right? Certainly not opposing the initiative. But I want to also point out that in that case, okay, of the factory, okay, let's take the factory for example, that you're concerned about having to build the walls. The proposed change as it stands would allow them to put air conditioning on the building without insulating the roof if it was uninsulated, based on the way it's written.
Right.
So I just want to point that out, that I can appreciate that the intent is trying to keep a building from having to insulate the walls, but the way this is written would also negate them from insulating the roof.
But I think the argument Ken's making is the economics of it are gonna make them insulate the roof.
Right, and if they touch the insulation on the roof, now they have to meet it per code. You can't just do I'm just gonna get to R19 and call it good. If you touch it, now you have to beat the code. So if they truly don't have insulation, they're gonna have to provide it, because the cost of the amount of air conditioning needed. And if you could say, well, they'll just put in spot cooling. Well, yeah, but the heat load is so tremendous from that roof that even spot cooling would get so outrageously expensive. So that's I guess where I'm saying is the roof, I think, would take care of itself. It's the walls that
Your
primarily
proposal
it's
does say
tilt-up.
wall insulation is not required. So that's where you tie it to the wall.
I could, yeah, but it's tilt ups that are the biggest concern, because let's face, or the schools that have somebody has brick or block, because everything's surface mounted, they got everything mounted on that thing. And
Yeah,
to
it's just not
now,
easy to change.
yeah, just pull it all off and redo it and get 6-inch walls in there is gonna be outrageously expensive. Or they do it on the outside, that's the only other option. They stucco the outside, so now you're stuccoing the entire outside of this building. That's not an cheap, and the payback on that is gonna be never, basically, because the wall loads are, when you got that mass wall, they're not that significant. Not like the roof loads.
So, and we need this amendment because as it is right now, they submit for a permit to put that conversion to air conditioning. You think they're gonna require insulation?
If they don't have heat,
If
if it's a factory,
if there was no heat.
yeah. They could interpret it that way. So that's why I'm proposing it.
I don't work with that section of code enough, so I don't know how to.
It's,
suggest
it
a
is
change,
totally,
but
it's
just-
totally different
It's
than,
just a matter of.
yeah,
what's
the
right place
18
to try to
I don't have the
say that.
18 with me, but it basically said if you're increasing your energy use, you have to do this. This gets into if you're increasing your energy use, you have to do other things, but nowhere in there does it say you have to condition you have to you have to get your walls up. So this corrected some of those issues that are in the 18 that had that comment. But because this basically comes right out and says change in space conditioning. And most people will look at that saying going from VAP to AC is a change in space conditioning. So that's where I'm wanted to point it out.
So you want to say that it's not a change in condition.
Correct. Correct.
And so the question is, where do we put that in code?
So that would fall under that exception 3 on that change in space conditioning section.
Okay.
Exception 3 would just say, you know, that an evap cooled space is a conditioned space. Changing to a different type of air conditioning system does not require compliance with C502. Because C502 goes through and says you got to meet the whole code.
Right.
That's if it's a non-conditioned or low energy space that is altered. Right?
Correct.
It's only talking about those spaces.
Only talking about those. So that's the only place that pops up, which is a lot different than the way it popped up in 2018. So
Was that a proposed amendment? You're gonna add verbiage to that exception?
yeah, I mean, we could say that it doesn't have to meet the walls in that section, but I just thought the walls don't have to meet it, but I just thought I'd just say
Yeah, because you're saying economics is gonna drive the roof.
the roof, right? So if you want, if it'd be better, more palatable, I could just say, I'm just trying to say that going from evap to AC, I hate to have somebody have to either stucco their walls or fur out their walls. That's my gripe. The roof, I agree with. It needs to be done.
Right.
But the walls are where I'm struggling. So we could either change that to say they only need to, they do not need to comply with the walls can remain as is, we could even say.
That's what I would.
Okay.
So you have to comply with 502, and this is an exception.
So this is Clayton. I just want to bring out a couple of differences between the 18 and the 24. The 18 specifically said in this section must come into full compliance with this code, which could invoke a lot of other
Right.
things other than wall insulation or ceiling insulation for that matter.
Right.
So I definitely think that the modified language in the 24 is a significant
It is.
improvement.
It is.
Right, because it
Yep.
exempts large sections of the code and only points to 502. However, I also want to point out that 502 isn't just about wall insulation. It includes fenestration, includes windows, doors, other things. Okay, so just want to point that out. If you kind of narrow in on wall insulation, it wouldn't exempt the need to address other aspects of 502.
Yeah.
This Dennis, I gotta say, I'm still confused by the whole thing because the entire section C502 is about additions.
I know,
And-
it's a weird
and-
place
and-
to put
and
it.
Adding, converting something to refrigerated air conditioning instead of evap
Not an
cooling
addition.
is not an addition. So I think you're in the wrong place entirely. I'm not sure where the right place is, but to me, I don't see how it's relevant.
Yeah, so you go to alterations and it doesn't show up at all. So you go to alterations, it doesn't show up at all. You go to repairs, it doesn't show up at all. You go to change of use, change of occupancy or use, which is 505, it doesn't show up.
So we could add a
Yeah, any-
C504 that says what you want to say.
And even C 505.2, energy use intensities. It doesn't require the,
Well, it would be an alteration. Why don't you just add a new section that says what you want to say?
so we could just, no, we could, because energy use intensity, I would think would be the right place for it, but it's not requiring you on the, to upgrade everything.
That's under change of occupancy or use. It's not, putting the air conditioning to replace evap cooling is not necessarily changing the occupancy or the use.
True.
So I don't think it belongs there. I think it needs to go into alteration. That's what you're doing.
Okay, and if you put it in alterations, it's not requiring, you're not altering any of that, you're just altering the mechanical, which then you don't get into having to make any upgrades. So that's where,
This is Clayton. Based on the discussion thus far, then I would recommend a change to your proposed amendment. Okay, which is to say, a space in lawful existence with evaporative cooling. Just leave it at that, okay, because it's an exception. So as an exception, it wouldn't have to comply with the charging language to say that it has to comply with the other section. Okay, you're just designating that two factors. Okay, I would encourage two factors. One is that it's evaporative cooled, and one that it was in lawful compliance at that time, right? Because what we don't want is someone to go toss an evaporative cooler on a shed and then say, hey, it's evaporative cooled. Right. So we want to establish that, right, it was operating lawfully at one time.
okay. I would agree with that.
And you want to add that exception.
Right. And just leave it at that, right?
Exception to what?
Exception to 502.2.
Because that's the only place where it talks about change, even though it's in additions, that's the only place that talks about change in space conditioning. So it'd be exception 3, and it'd just be reworded it. So to keep this moving, I propose we add exception 3 to 502.2 as worded.
Do we have a second?
A second.
Okay,
So that,
Any more discussion? This one, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion
I'll
passes.
abstain.
You'll abstain?
I don't think I understand it.
yeah, I know, right? It is
I don't think I understand.
very, it's just a weird way to put it. Why did they put change in space conditioning in
You have another
additions?
appointment?
There's only a couple more items here. Should we just cruise them real fast?
We'll
and
still
then-
have a quorum, Dave, if you leave.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
But
The next item is C 502.37, which has to do with additions, 502.37. And that has to do with because in 502.37, that's the additional energy efficiency requirements. So that gets into if you're doing an addition of so many square feet, or if you're doing an addition, you have to comply with 50% of the number of points in those tables in 406. And what I'm saying is right now additions, it says additions less than 1,000 square feet and less than 50% of the floor area. I was just gonna say, if we're gonna say 1,000 square, rather than 1,000 square feet, I was gonna make that, it should say 25,000 square feet, right? Because it's half of it. So that should be 25,000 square feet. Sorry about that. And I don't know the metrics, the meters, but so that's what I wanted to change that exception to. So it's changing exception to just the areas from 1,000 to 25,000. So if you're doing a 25,000 square foot addition, now you have to comply to half of the 50% of the number of the points in 406.
That's it. So this could actually end up hitting us more than new buildings.
It could if
Because.
somebody does a 25,000 square foot addition.
Yeah, I could see that being more likely happening than somebody building a over 50,000 square
Right.
foot building.
Right. It could very well.
Yeah.
But it has to be less than 50% of the.
I'm not saying it's the
existing floor.
problem, I'm just saying that could be the case.
So we can keep it at 50,000 square feet. And then it kind of makes it rare that that would happen.
My opinion is if the intent, which I think it is to make it rare, because we don't know how this is gonna implement.
Right.
We should up that, maybe keep it at the 50.
And less than.
And the likelihood is we're gonna eventually be coming back to relook at these things, right? We don't know that we will, but.
Right.
We're thinking we will, so.
All right.
We'd look at this as we're looking at all the others.
So leave it at 50.
That would be my recommendation.
Okay, so I make a motion to change or change exception 2 in C 50237 to from 1,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet as I've got proposed.
This is Dennis, I'll second.
More discussion? All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
All right, the same thing with C 503.6. There's if you turn there, they got the additional efficiencies. So that section, there really is no, you have to, so 503. We just, 503 is alterations. And in alterations, there's these 503.6, which is additionally energy efficiency requirements. And in that, the number of credits of the building, you have to basically meet all the requirements in there that are in the section. So you got to do everything. So if you got a building that is that you're changing, you have to meet all those requirements in 406.1. So I wanted to add an exception 5, which says alterations that are less than 50,000 square feet. So that way you don't have to meet those additional efficiency requirements.
So you want to add that exception?
Yep.
Another exception.
Yep.
Yeah, it would follow here, so then
Right.
that would.
Jim here, wouldn't the change that you proposed, wouldn't that comply then? Because it's already at 50,000 or 100,000. Right, so it's thrown you back to 406, and been modified for 50,000 square feet or 100,000.
No, that was for 50. Yeah, that you're right. It would.
Because.
You're right. No, it would. You're right.
Yeah.
If it goes to 406 already has it. Correct. So I don't need to add that exception. Let me cross that out. Good catch. Thank you. And then the other 2 exceptions I had are just following what we were talking about in the R section of the code. So the lighting, we'd want to adopt, like Dennis was saying. So if you go to R404.2.
That's the interior lighting controls with dimmers and.
I see these 2 sections as already being voted on with the residential. We
Clayton's right.
talked about the interior.
Yeah,
lighting
we
controls,
talked
the
about
exterior
both of
lighting
these
controls.
and voted to accept those.
Okay, yeah, because these are residential. So this is similar to the 2 exceptions that we had for the 2 sections that we had in the IRC. And so for residents, we just feel that providing automatic controls on
Could be a
on
safety
lighting.
issue and it's a cost issue.
Okay, so I make a motion to delete sections R 404.2 and R 404.3.
It's
Oh, we did?
It's already been.
It's already voted.
Okay,
Yep.
They're gone.
all right. Then I feel like.
A lot of work.
It would have been a lot easier just to say, throw this in the trash.
But we can't. We
We can't do it, and I think I really feel we put a good faith effort into try to.
Trying.
What works. and
Yeah.
It's our best, it's our
Make it
best chance.
A gradual transition rather than this jump off the cliff transition.
Well, I'm afraid jumping off the cliff, we're shutting down.
Oh, yeah.
We
We,
can't
we
do
need
that.
to set the.
We're still on
future meeting
agenda.
date.
Yes,
So can we pick a date here, Clayton? Brett?
What?
We need to pick a date for the next meeting. Or run out the door.
Do we need a meeting to review the final document?
What I would suggest is that Clayton sends us all the amendments to review.
I would be happy to do that.
The whole package, all the codes,
Yeah.
because that's where we're at, right?
I'll send the counties, also.
Yeah,
I'll,
send those and we can review those.
Set it up.
Okay,
I'm a little prior with my schedule.
all right. Okay.
Thanks, man.
April 24th would be the next.
April 24th. At this point, unless somebody finds a change in the amendments that get sent out, we're done, right?
Correct.
So the next meeting would be to review some of this mechanical stuff. Right? Am I missing something?
Correct. If from my interpretation, you have completed the review of all of the amendments with approvals, consensus from the committee. So your amendment package is complete, and so we could initiate a quarterly meeting moving forward from here, if you so choose.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, I think, given this A2L thing, I think a quarterly is probably.
Between the A2L, the DOE and the comp check, I think it's mandatory that we have to meet.
So I would be happy to help assist in setting out that schedule, which I can send out to the group to let you know.
Yeah, that doodle thing is really
That's fine.
nice.
And we would also recommend that we get on the schedule that the city code identifies.
Yeah, the Wednesdays.
Right, the third Wednesday of the month,
Right.
starting at 10 AM.
That's fine with adequate notice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So we'll put that schedule together based on
Okay.
this.
And the thing that'll be good too is those webinars that you sent out will be. I'll sit through those by then too, so have a better understanding and hopefully we'll have a comp check. So,
And then I would also like to point out for your next agenda item call to the audience, we only have one person left. Because the committee voted to meet in person. Just want to follow up that technically the people that are tuning in online are not part of the audience because they're not here in person.
They don't get a say, huh?
Right. Unless you change that for future meetings, it is a streaming element only, similar to mayor and council. The people that tune in on mayor and council meetings remotely don't get to participate. In the
and
audience.
I'd say that I'd like to have the people that tune in be able to comment.
So
I think, because I know Phoenix did that and I thought it was very well done.
So we can add another agenda item to the next meeting.
Yeah.
To consider moving to a hybrid format that would allow that.
I think that'd be
Sounds
very,
like a good
I
idea.
really would push that. It's really nice because I was even on the, and I know you were on it and it was just nice and you recognize people and you see them and hear them and
Right,
so.
okay.
And I'd like to know
Give them
what
more
they're
flexibility
thinking.
too.
Yeah, so that's not on the agenda, so we have,
It is, it's the format part of item 5.
okay, future meeting dates format.
Can we change that real quick?
2, 4, 5, you still have a quorum. We're good.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay,
So I move that we allow,
hybrid format.
yeah, Thank you.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
All in favor?
I,
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. We're going to a hybrid.
yes.
Okay, Clayton's gonna work on the agenda and then we have a call to the audience. Last chance.
Really participate.
Okay,
Right,
so do I have a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
All
I
in
most
favor?
second.
Then I'll second.
meeting adjourned at 11:57 a.m.
Gentlemen.
Oh.